Welcome to History Revision Timelines. In this video, we will be looking at the context behind the problems Elizabeth faced when she became Queen in 1558. The content we'll be looking at is primarily focused on the Edexcel GCSE course, but I'm sure can be used for most other courses. Before delving in, just a reminder to please like and subscribe if you have found this revision video useful. The Edexcel GCSE course drops you straight into 1558 and asks you to analyse the extent of the problems Elizabeth faced. These are dealing with the religious divide, dealing with questions of her legitimacy, dealing with threats from abroad, and building a team of trusted advisors. This timeline aims to give you some context to these problems and also evaluate how successfully Elizabeth overcame them. There is a worksheet in the description below that you can download and complete as we go along. First up, let's look at the religious divide hanging over England and see how Elizabeth addressed it. It's worth visiting why religion was so important in the 16th century. As you can see from this medieval doom painting, the possibility of going to hell was a huge influencer on people's behaviour. The church was seen as the guardians responsible for making sure people's souls would be delivered to heaven when they died. They set the rules that people had to follow and also had the power to forgive sins. For much of the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church had complete control of this in Western Europe. They were subsequently extremely powerful and influential on people's lives. Some would say they had become too powerful and had allowed corruption to creep into their organisation. This woodcut shows poor people paying the church huge amounts of money to forgive their sins. Indeed, in 1517, a German monk called Martin Luther called this corruption out. The subsequent effect was the Reformation, where lots of protest churches were set up around Europe in defiance of the Catholic Church. This brought huge amounts of anxiety for everyday people, who were now torn between following different churches who all promised their way was the way to deliver their souls to heaven. In England, for political reasons, Henry VIII decided to split with the Catholic Church in 1533. This kick-started a period of turbulence as the people of England were roller-coasted from one religion to the other. Edward VI, for example, made the English follow a very strict form of Protestantism, whereas 4 years later, Mary I forced the country back to Catholicism, burning 300 Protestants along the way. This meant that when Elizabeth became Queen in 1558, she was confronted by a population that were divided and weary of what would happen to them if they followed the wrong religion. The mood was ripe for rebellions, or worse, for the people to welcome a foreign invasion. To solve this problem, Elizabeth's religious settlement was a compromise. It was intended to offer a church that would, in some way, appeal to the great majority of people. While still being Protestant, it nonetheless had many Catholic attributes. For example, in the Act of Uniformity, the wording of the church services were left deliberately unclear in order to appeal to both Catholics and Protestants alike. The Act of Royal Injunctions also allowed images in churches, which was something Catholics could get on board with. In this way, Elizabeth was largely successful in avoiding the religious divisions becoming a major issue for her at the start of her reign. The next problem Elizabeth faced had to do with questions over her legitimacy. Legitimacy focuses on what legal rights Elizabeth had to become queen. If her subjects did not believe that she had a legitimate claim to the throne, they may have refused to follow her laws, launch a rebellion against her, or claim to follow an alternative leader. Elizabeth's legal claim to the throne comes from the fact that she was the last surviving child that Henry VIII had with a wife. You would think that this was straightforward for Elizabeth, yet problems arose for Elizabeth when she was only 3 years old. Her father ordered the execution of her mother after being falsely accused of treason, adultery, and witchcraft. Aside from having to experience the trauma of having your mum killed by your dad, things were made worse for Elizabeth when Henry declared her illegitimate, meaning she had no legal claim to the throne. Estranged from her father for much of her early life, a second blow came in 1553 when her own brother disinherited her right to the throne in favour of their cousin. This was a problem for Elizabeth when she became queen in 1558. After the way her father and brother had treated her, there were many who doubted her claim to the throne and instead suggested alternative leaders. Elizabeth, however, took these murmurings in her stride. She did her utmost to build the image that she was her father's daughter, even saying, "Although I may not be a lioness, I am a lion's cub and inherit many of his qualities." Ultimately, Elizabeth played a good PR game that helped establish her connection to Henry VIII to put doubts over her legitimacy to bed. Questions about Elizabeth's legitimacy feed directly into the next problem Elizabeth faced: threats from abroad. A major problem facing Elizabeth was that for many, the Queen of Scotland was a preferable alternative Queen of England. Mary, Queen of Scots, was Elizabeth's cousin once removed. Her claim to the English throne came from the fact that Henry VII was her great-grandfather. Crucially, she was also a Catholic, which made her a preferable alternative to Elizabeth in the eyes of many Catholics. Mary was also betrothed to the future King of France, which formed an alliance between the French and the Scots. This was dangerous for England, as it meant they could be attacked simultaneously from both the north and the south. To counteract this threat, Mary I, Elizabeth's sister, not her cousin, married Philip II of Spain, forming an alliance between England and Spain. This proved disastrous for England as they lost their control of Calais and spiralled into a lot of debt in order to support Spain's war with France. When Mary died, so did the alliance with Spain, leaving Elizabeth's England vulnerable. To make matters worse, as a Protestant country, Elizabeth's England was now surrounded by Catholic neighbours who questioned her legitimacy. To counteract this threat, Elizabeth negotiated a peace treaty with France, whilst also underhandedly giving money to Scottish Protestant lords to undermine Mary Queen of Scots' rule. This once again showed how Elizabeth was able to minimise a threat to her reign. The final problem Elizabeth had to deal with was on surrounding herself with trusted advisors. This included, of course, the option of getting married. Now, it's important to recognise that Elizabeth in her youth witnessed the execution of her mother on her father's orders, and also the subsequent death, execution and divorce of a further 3 stepmothers. There were, however, some advantages of getting married for Elizabeth to consider. Firstly, if she chose to marry a foreign ruler or a powerful lord, she could expect to gain a valuable ally who could fight to protect her rule. Secondly, getting married would open the door to providing a legitimate heir, which would bring further stability to her rule. However, aside from Elizabeth's own personal experiences, there are also disadvantages to consider. Namely, that by marrying one man, it would mark a favourite, which could in turn alienate other powerful lords and rulers. As we will later see with the Duke of Alençon, Elizabeth would often dangle the prospect of a marriage to get lords and rulers to do her bidding. Secondly, there was always the threat that her husband could take her power and keep it for himself. This is why Elizabeth presumably rejected a marriage proposal from Philip II's son in 1556 and from Philip himself in 1559. Similarly, Elizabeth had to surround herself with a trusted group of advisors to form her Privy Council. Once again, Elizabeth had to tread with caution, because if she was seen to just pick her favourites, it may cause jealousy and resentment from some powerful nobles who Elizabeth could not afford to rebel. Subsequently, she made a big show of not selecting Robert Dudley, her childhood best friend, to avoid alienating any powerful lords. She also made the sensible decision of appointing William Cecil as her Lord Chancellor. He was a competent and loyal advisor that Elizabeth would often refer to as her spirit. Overall, it would be fair to say that Elizabeth was able to surround herself with trusted advisors and ultimately prevail with all the challenges that faced her when she became Queen. So that brings us to the end of this revision video. I hope you found it useful. Please check out the worksheet attached below. Best of luck with your revision. Bye for now.